Oh, man. Saturday. One full hour busted pencils fully. Leaded education talk. Educated educators talking education. Dr. Johnny Lupinacci, Jacob, chairman of the board. Me, Dr. Tim Slecker. Man, and you, the listener out there in your car, in your workshop, out doing a jog, listening to us streaming on one of the, the civic media outlets that are out there. Maybe you're in Hayward, maybe maybe you're in Michigan, maybe you're in Minnesota right now. But thank you for jumping on, and you're going, what are you thanking me for? I didn't even mean to find this radio station. Well, just hold tight then, because we think you're gonna maybe enjoy this ride. Yeah, it's a show about education, and no, it's not a show about making bulletin boards and baking cookies and leaving an apple for your teacher. Although that's always not a bad idea. Just don't do anything bad to that apple before you leave it. Or don't leave any apple cores because that sends the wrong message. But be nice to your teachers. But Jacob and Johnny, I love every Saturday, because I really get that, like, I know for sure somebody is just like going, "Oh, man, I can't change the channel and I'm stuck with these yo-yos." Like, "Hey, you know, they we're gonna make your time worth it until you get that, radio, fix so that you can change the channel, but for now, just chill out, hang out with us because, education, what's your neighbor thinking? What's going on?" And right now, let's jump right into it. Wisconsin. Woo! Who knew? Are you part of the University of Wisconsin system? Do you have a student in the University of Wisconsin system? Do you teach in the University of Wisconsin system? Are you yourself currently taking classes at the University of Wisconsin system? That could be any. That's the Oshkosh campus, Oshkosh campus. That's the UW Madison. For all of you flagship waivers that are out there, make sure that we're talking about you and any of those other institutions. Big headline though, and this is one of those issues that we've talked a lot about here, is the reduction in programs. And so breaking that down for my neighbor Johnny, my neighbor was like, what do I care if colleges are eliminating programs? Okay, let's phrase it this way. Colleges, in this case, the University of Wisconsin's public colleges, universities, are eliminating majors. Maybe that's the better way to say it. In other words, I'm going to college to be a psychedelic basket weaver. Well, that is a program or a major that doesn't exist in any of the University of Wisconsin campuses right now. But if you were potentially going, that is what is on the chopping block here. In fact, we're saying, from the headline very quickly out of higher ed dive, Wisconsin public universities could start shedding programs more rapidly. So, in that title, in other words, they're already shedding them. Let's speed it up. A committee of administrators and faculty from the universities of Wisconsin developed a metric which flags programs with an average of 15 or fewer juniors and seniors enrolled annually in a 3-year span. In other words, Johnny, this is a math problem I'm going to need you to break down for me. 15 annually in a 3-year period. Got to figure out how to make sense of that. Um, if you're not meeting that metric, it sounds like we're going to get rid of that program. And according to this, that could mean 65 programs or 10% of the entire University of Wisconsin system's majors, undergraduate majors, could be eliminated. There's the stage. It's set. Producer Jacob, co host Johnny. Is this good, bad, or is this just news? Johnny.
Well, Tim, it's a combination of both. Depends on kind of where you're at. In the just news category, I mean, this is happening in many states, right? I think Oklahoma recently had a state review similar, and ended up closing, I think, 41 programs across their state system, and are slotted to suspend another 20 some.
Mhm.
But also in the just news category as well, Tim, we know that all of higher ed is navigating enrollment and financial pressures. It's like we're going through a massive restructuring of like how much this costs our students and then also how much it costs to provide quality education. And you said this before, I wish it wasn't all by the numbers, right? And so, this article you shared with me at the end of the week, I was excited we were going to talk about it because it emphasizes that the sort of the rubric that's announced for, evaluating these programs that have on average 15 fewer juniors and seniors enrolled annually over a 3-year span are, you said that's some 65 programs, 10% of the system,
Mhm.
undergraduate programming. They're looking, the rubric seems to be, although it mentions qualitative, looking at what these programs offer qualitatively, it's pretty clear it's the quantitative, it's the numbers, particularly the cost to have these programs to run these courses with low enrollment. And I think that's a conversation happening on nearly every college campus in the country. Low enrollment cannot be justified in cost,
Ooh.
and so what that means is like you have to have a certain number of students that their tuition is covering like the expense of them being in the classroom, them having a highly qualified instructor assigned to it. So, that's just the news. My take on it, Tim, is this is classic starvation strategy that
Okay.
Wisconsinites out there are familiar with, right? It's public 4-year institutions are like they're funded at the state level. There's state budgets that allocate money per student. They call it full-time equivalency. So full-time equivalent students, or for people in the know, that's FTE, right?
Mm.
That's one of the abbreviations we use in higher ed. But just like our K-12 schools, there's a per pupil kind of allotment we could look at. And Wisconsin ranks around 43rd out of the 50 states in the country for allocating public funds to people attending public 4-year universities. So that's in a sense, taxpayer dollars that go to the university to support all programs, to support all
Mhm.
undergraduate education. And Wisconsin legislation, has rolled out, like many other states in this country, what I call the starvation strategy. Right? Classic. The state starves the system and then uses enrollment decline as a justification to cut programs. So
Ah.
several years
Oh.
into the starvation, now we're saying, oh, check it out. We're going to evaluate these programs to see if they're financially viable. And it's enrollment. That it has nothing to do with the decade long, starvation strategy rolled out here.
For
That's my take on it. So I started with, the facts from the article you shared, and I give it a little bit of my take. Hold on a minute here. Like let's pay attention. One, the qualitative caveat, right,
yeah.
that the rubric announced here says, values of programs are also taking into consideration the qualitative contributions, right, and should be, a part of, like evaluating these programs.
Let
However,
me
when you
John,
look
let's
closely, it's all
explain.
about the numbers.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
explain too, though, the qualitative aspect because I can hear somebody, what do you mean? What the heck are you? In other words, does a major just in and of itself represent a statement about what we
Yeah.
value? So, in other words, you know what? 5 students enrolled in understanding some content, some major, art, okay, right? We value art. This is a public university system put together not exclusively to find the highest enrolled majors and then only fund them. It's a public education institution committed to the democracy, the civic life, the quality of life, the good of what happens in Wisconsin. And the last I checked, the arts were considered something that we're supposed to value. And so, Johnny, to me, this is what we're talking about. So, in other words, is there just a major? You know what? It didn't meet those enrollment metrics, but darn it, we believe in democracy and representation, in beauty. And the fact is that higher education is not just about signing up students to go learn how to do something to go get a job. It's also about preparing the whole individual to
Yeah.
participate in society and civic life. And part of that is the well rounded education so that we have people, community members, our neighbors. We have neighbors who were art majors, who were engineers, who were physical therapists, who, were sociologists, because all of those people together make a community, and that's what makes a community rich. So I know I editorialized a lot there, but Johnny, I'm going to put that though and go, my I believe that when we hear that, hey, we're going to hold space for some of the qualitative metrics, and I just gave you one. What I'm concerned about, though, because I've seen this now, and I'll say I have lived through two institutions that reduced programs because of enrollment. And we talked about each time, well, some majors we're just going to keep us within the bounds of our mission. If you're out there listening, I would like evidence that any of these quote qualitative majors have any of them ever been saved?
Well, what Tim, I think what I meant, I wouldn't necessarily say that they're qualitative majors. It's just the
No, I
information
know.
for the evaluation is, it says it will consider both quantitative, like numbers,
Yeah.
like how many students are enrolled and whatnot, versus also qualitatively, like what their experience is,
Mi-
what's
mission
reported out
fit,
as.
mission fit,
Yeah,
mission fit.
and one of the things, Tim, is we've talked about this as we talked about. Jonathan Gerko comes on the show occasionally, and he's written about that concept, publicization. And again, I talked about that starvation strategy of the underfunding of public ed, especially higher education. But when we think about this, we're seeing a corporate sort of world, a private framework mapped onto public discourse. That being, and this came directly from a legislator in support of these cuts, called this a pathway towards right sizing. And
Mm.
right sizing is corporate speak for layoffs. So again, it's a classic way of saying, here's how we downsize, and here's sort of the justification and manufactured rationale for it. So when we come back, Tim, I want to refocus our conversation around what you propose. What is a university for? Let's get into it. What is a university for when we come back? Busted Pencils.
Off the pencil, fully leaded education talk, educated educators talking education talking. University of Wisconsin public education, higher education institutions like Oshkosh, Whitewater, those places. University of Wisconsin Madison too. Eliminating or figuring out how to eliminate majors. They call them programs, but majors that are not enrolling enough students over a 3-year period. We said, is this news? Is this something else? Johnny and I both, yeah, it's news. And then Johnny said something else. I came back at going, okay, quantitative versus qualitative measures. I overemphasized maybe qualitative to mean mission fit, but Johnny, came out of that last segment though with a pretty strong and profound, and I think centering question. What are public universities for? And I'm going to emphasize public universities for. Are they to prepare people to get jobs and therefore job training centers? Or are they to prepare people for life in a democracy, to appreciate culture, to understand our neighbor? Um, or is it, and you, what if it's both,
Well,
Johnny?
Tim, I think it's important to add on to your question. That is a question responding to my question. Like we're really centering the discussion now around what are universities for? And again, like just reminding the listener, my take on this, Tim, is that this is like, a funding crisis reframed
Mhm.
as an enrollment problem. But nonetheless, the question I think is valid. And I want to add, I think it's both, but I want to change a little bit of the first part of the definition here where you said should they be job training centers, right? I think they should, but they shouldn't only be job training centers for what current markets demand, right? And so when like one of the things that's really important about strong public university systems is that they do prepare people to enter the workforce
Mhm.
on a multitude of different fields, right? Whether the market demands it at the current moment or not, they sort of sometimes they have these, you know, these these boons of
Yeah.
majors, and then things kind of slow down and they recalibrate, and then they boon again. We know this for those of us who have been in higher ed over a period of time. So I think they should prepare learners to enter the workforce, but not only for what markets currently demand, right? And I think as part of that preparation, this is the other thing is that part that you called, it should be included in that a space for knowledge creation, for democratic diversity, citizenship, cultural preservation, exploration of different ideas, a balance of the arts and humanities and the sciences kind of woven together. And that's one of the great things. I'll be nostalgic for a moment here of sort of the tradition of universities, as I'm not saying that there shouldn't be some kind of adaptation in the moment, right?
Mm.
But that it shouldn't be an either or. In fact, if we move to it's just a job training center for the current market demands, then we're going to constantly be rebuilding all the time because the markets are going to change, right? So I think that we should be flexible and, adaptive, but at the same time, remember as a core value of becoming, let's say right now, an engineer, right? Or, a programmer should also be having courses in philosophy, should also have, an art course or an art history class because it well rounds what you bring to the workplace. It well rounds what you offer as a potential divergent thinker. In fact, I listen to industry often as somebody in higher ed, in these conversations. And industries, surprisingly, here's some insider information, will say, especially in these sciences, we need well rounded people ready to enter the workforce. You can learn to code online before you even go to college. We
Mhm.
hire college graduates because they studied the classics, because they've given speeches in their comm class, because they've shared space with other students different than they are, right? You can learn in this day and age alone in a room with a computer a lot of important information, but they value college graduates for that well-roundedness. And I worry, Tim, when we cut the well-roundedness as a way to disguise that we defunded things and it's no
Ah,
longer affordable, it's funding crisis reframed, what we lose, right? And I could get back into that as we, dive deeper into the show or close this down. You know,
I
reading that article, I did jot down a list of things of, hey, if we do cut these programs aggressively, as we're seeing in states across the country, Wisconsin, what happens?
I this
What
is a John,
happens? So let's
thank you.
start. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because at some point, okay, and now I'm going to be more factual, potentially less philosophical, and understand that yeah, there's a math a mathematical approach to doing this, which makes it feel like we're not making qualitative decisions. Okay, but so we're going to cut under enrolled programs. All right. And typically, this is in response to enrollment crises, right? And so, what'll be left then, Johnny, are the popular majors. And so, therefore, we won't have an enrollment crisis. Oh, yeah. But as you point out, market shifts. And now Major X that was eliminated is all of a sudden back in swing. And guess what? You have an enrollment decrease again because nobody wants to go to your college because you don't offer the major that is hot, or even bigger potentially, people start identifying you as going, I don't know. They don't really do a whole lot there except this. So there is something to a diversity of offerings that actually is good for enrollment. And so, worried about this, I think it's a good point. I don't know how much we're going to come back because, John, I want to set this up. You and I have graduate degrees, extended graduate degrees. Are we better because of it? Research is saying we're not. We'll figure this one out when we get back. It's busted pencils knocking on your door, thumping on your door, actually. Tim, Johnny, Jacob, we are here Saturday. Hey, and if you're downloading and it's not Saturday, thank you also for downloading and listening when you can, because that's the great thing about Busted Pencil Civic Media. You could be listening to it right now somewhere in Wisconsin, anywhere potentially in Wisconsin, lots of places in Michigan and Minnesota. Or, I'm always pointing out, if you're in Finland, you can listen by downloading any civic media show, not just Busted Pencils. And that's the great thing here is, civic media producing content in the digital age right now so that people can get it when they need it and when they want it. And just happy to be a part of the civic media family from that standpoint. Johnny, okay, we'll come back, we'll summarize, but I pointed this out. So you are Dr. Johnny Lubinacci. I am Dr. Tim Slecker. Before the doctor, I became a master's in education, Tim Slecker. Before that, I had a bachelor's degree. Um, New research and
Oh,
we're going to
quotes,
put
quotes
new
are
in
got
quote. Yeah,
got
big
scare
scare
quotes
quote.
around research here.
New research. Somebody asked the question, should teachers um, get graduate degrees, or actually, what they're really saying is, um, should there be funding and pay raises for teachers to get advanced degrees when research shows that people like me and you, Johnny, when we're teaching, us having those advanced degrees, our kids don't score better on tests. Therefore, advanced degrees are not worth the money, not worth the effort, not worth it. And Johnny, I know where we're both going to go on this. I got to first point out, go to Huffington Post 2011, I think it was, when some guy whose name was Dr. Tim Slecker um, actually wrote about the research back then that pointed out that getting graduate degrees did not produce better test scores. And what they really said was at that time, too, was teachers aren't better when they get graduate degrees. And come on, man. What are you talking about? It's just like I take this offensively from a couple of different directions. The first is okay. whatever. It's not associated with raised test scores. Well, okay, what is? And if so, great. I never went to graduate school, and I was never even influenced about going to graduate school because I thought it would make me better lecturing, giving students better access to better grades. I went because being a professional, getting an advanced degree, learning from other teachers who were experiencing classrooms in graduate classes, learning more, becoming more understanding of what it means to be a teacher. The graduate degree was a professional obligation so that it was never linked to people are gonna go, "Well, then why'd you do it?" It wasn't a performance enhancement tool. It was a professional development, experiential wisdom type of an activity, and I frame this as going, "So you really would like to do away with educated educators who are going to be educating your kids?" This is so for my neighbor, do you really want less educated teachers? I don't think so, Johnny.
Well, Tim, there's a couple of things worth pointing out here. And I'm going to back up and start with that. We're reading from an article here from 74 million, as was worth discussing. An organization founded with the backing of the charter school movement and privatization of schools doesn't invalidate the so-called research. And I keep putting the scare quotes up around it. It's a little of my ego as a researcher of teacher, effectiveness and what it takes to become a good teacher. It doesn't necessarily invalidate that research, but the framing, emphasizing, traditional credentialing is wasteful and alternatives work better, blah, blah, blah. This aligns and just, the whole article just speaks of school reform movements that are based at weakening teacher unions and traditional public education structures. So, like, to me, the point of this outlet is to, to put information out there that might not be false information or misinformation, but is bias, to putting teachers down and to, weakening teacher unions and traditional public education structures. The other thing that's worth noting here are that really good graduate programs are in constant conversation with industry and with the changed needs of, like, for example, in teacher and education master's programs, right? A lot of those programs are formed and shaped, like what you learn and the projects that you do in those programs as part of your advanced degree are often ones that we're, they originate from our teachers. They're getting their advanced degrees, be better teachers. So when you shape those programs in those ways, right, you make them more meaningful. Meanwhile, in the privatization era of this, right, because I think it's like 88% of teacher pay raise is connected with time spent in a program or in classes to advance your knowledge of the profession, that so many different opportunities. The market for getting a master's degree is highly saturated, right? And so we could say there's some things that we can take from this. Although, Tim, I tend to want to take this article and just delete it, like I do most things I don't agree with. I just put my, put my mouse over the little X, click, go away. No, I don't do that. I read all the perspectives. But Tim, engaging with this though, I think it is an important wake up call that if you're an education program that isn't, and any advanced degree program that isn't making a relevant connection to how you're better at your profession
Mhm.
through this advanced study, then you kind of deserve to be caught. You're part of the program here. You're a part of the problem.
Mm.
So, I also want to point out, Tim, like I think you hit on this. There's a major contradiction here, right? Like on one hand, we're saying, teachers' advanced degrees don't improve outcomes. Well, they just don't improve test scores. And what we know about test scores is that you could be a really great teacher and maybe some of your students' test scores will go up, but great teaching isn't a correlation or causation to higher test scores. This has been proved with research. So that's not me saying we shouldn't have great teachers. It's me saying, like, when we evaluate teachers based on students' test scores only, right? We're missing the whole point.
Hmm.
So I think there's a both and here. I'm trashing the article by and large, but I'm also saying there is actually a problem where there are too many master's programs, and we need to be able to make sure that they're relevant and connected to advancement in the degree, in the profession, like you talked about, Tim. And I think we need to get away with the language of "are you better,"
Yeah.
because that quickly further develops the divide, it further grows the divide between people who get college degrees and people who don't. We're all on the same level playing field in our
Yeah.
community, right? I know you mean that, and I
Yeah.
mean that, but when we're digesting information, this falls really quickly. This article from the 74 million falls really into quickly. Yeah, man, these teachers think they're so smart because they
Mhm.
get these degrees and they're not any better than us. And
Yeah,
it's like nobody.
and research shows that they're not any but and it was never you're right, John, it's never about better, and I just say, Jacob put up a quote, I said in 2011 for the HuffPost, I wrote this piece and, graduate degrees were never designed to improve test scores. And again, quoting from 2011, from me, back when we believed education was supposed to help children understand their world and learn how to thrive in an imperfect democracy, that's when we believed that a teacher who earned a graduate degree would be better prepared to serve this purpose, Johnny. So it's not that a graduate degree shouldn't be connected to being a better teacher, it should. And in fact, when you turn this advanced degree into saying it's wasted or it's not useful, and you're only saying because of test scores, that actually devalues teaching and learning and actually devalues children because the other thing was that guess what research also shows that teachers and curriculum that only focus on a small measurable set of testable skills actually harms children, particularly the most vulnerable, who need rich educational experiences outside of just testing math and literacy. In other words, they need exposure to the world, to history, to art, to all of those things that are culturally much more deeply embedded in what it means to be a teacher. And so I also was really alarmed at this too, because actually, to me, this research is also saying we don't want teachers teaching the things that really matter, the
Mhm.
things that might be uncomfortable, the things that might actually potentially have kids going home asking questions, the things that might push people to dig deeper. This was then an attack on critical thinking. And here again, I believe this is another reinforcement of saying, hey, look, don't be fooled. Don't be getting those teachers educated because when you get educated teachers, you get educated kids. And you know what happens when you get educated kids, don't you? Oh, you get the 1960s all over again.
Well, and Tim, this is just a big privatization effort, and I'm going to relate it as a blue collar scholar, Tim. It's a little bit different, but one of the things I noticed as a plumber was some of the best plumbers I was learning from weren't always the ones making the company the most money, but yet we were, given accolades based on how many big renovations and full redoing of plumbing, like how much we sold on a call versus how great of a job we did. For example, if you found that actually just need to tighten this little bolt over, this little connector over here, and you're good. Just, here's $60 for the call or whatever it was, you're done. That wasn't a good measurement of how good of a plumber you were based on how much money you brought back from your call. Same thing with teachers. If we're only looking at the test scores of their students on particular standardized tests to measure how effective they are and how much they should get paid. We're missing the point that teachers get better when they learn from other teachers, which is what happens in quality graduate's degrees. Tim, we're going to come back and maybe talk about how articles, right, smuggle in ideological assumptions that we're going to unpack here at Busted Pencils. Bunch of ideology smugglers in these articles. When we come back, Busted Pencils.
We're back. Man, goes so fast. Busted Pencils, fully loaded education talk. Um, we are educated educators talking education. Yes, with advanced graduate degrees. I know your test scores aren't going to go up because of me and Johnny, but who knows something else, Johnny? I do want to comment though. One of my measures of a great plumber is when they make sure that the poop goes out of the house, not into the house.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
I
What
like
is
the
there?
plumbers that jump on those turtles and make them fly away and then go down the pipes and pop out in the Mushroom Kingdom.
Yeah.
That's my favorite type of plumber. And Johnny is cosplaying as him right now, I think.
Oh my god, look at that. Super Mario. Um, Johnny, both of these articles, so University of Wisconsin shedding programs, research and graduate degrees, definitely news involved in them, definitely a little bit of intentional there we go, misguidedness. And I think that is hopefully too, say it's not that either of these articles are necessarily presenting things that aren't true, but why we try to bring these to Busted Pencils is to kind of help and say, yeah, there might be in here, but what are the intentions? What's behind this? And that's critical literacy, critical
Yes.
citizenship is, you read something, you go, okay, but what else could be going on here? And these are two great examples of gone, there's a lot more going on here than the headlines. I think that's where you were going.
Well, yeah, I think I called them ideology smugglers.
Yeah.
Like, and that's true of everything, Tim. Although I'm being a little like, and maybe it's not sarcasm, a little, pointed with how I'm, accusing these things or labeling them as, smuggling in ideological perspectives. Everything does that to some extent. And you nailed it, Tim. It's like doing a critical media literacy, like really read between the lines, take in the information, jot down the facts, and then ask who's sharing this and what's the perspective or slant being
Mhm.
purported here, right? And so, for me, these both are good examples of how research based arguments smuggle in ideological assumptions that are worth unpacking, especially when we're talking about schools. Like one of them deprofessionalizes teaching,
Yeah.
right? And we're like, come on, man. Like teachers are already down. It's one of the hardest professions to do. No one is claiming it's easy work out there, yet it tends to be lower pay. And there is a high rate of burnout and a high loss of how many teachers there are out there that are great teachers, right? We've talked about that. So, we got an article that further works to deprofessionalize things. And then another one that's reporting news, less ideological smuggling,
Mhm.
and the one we talked about in the beginning of the show, more of a reporting on what's going on about cutting particular majors. But again, Tim, I pointed it out in the beginning of the show. The smuggling here is that making us believe, the readers, us believe that like, wow, this is really an enrollment problem.
Yeah.
It's not. It's a funding crisis reframed.
Yeah, there you
Right.
go.
It's like the reason that we can't afford this well-rounded and enriching diversity of programs on our campus is because we're massively underfunded and figuring out where we can cut and what can and can't stay. But here's what I'll close on, Tim. What gets lost when
Mm,
teachers get deprofessionalized and leave,
yeah.
right? Their schools. What gets lost when we cut programs like you talked about that may have low enrollment? I'm putting quotes around that. But what gets lost? Well, you lose expertise that takes
Hmm.
decades to develop, right? You lose local knowledge and important community connections. We talk about strength of neighborhood and local democracies. You're going to lose these people because their programs get cut, whether they're students or faculty, and they're going to go somewhere else, right? We don't want that. Cultural diversity, right? That enriches. You talked about that, Tim. That might go away. Options for students who just don't fit the mold, right? Where do they go? Well, I guess they don't go anywhere. If we lose this, if we cut those options, they're gone. And then, Tim, one of my pet peeves, when you
Oh,
get rid of people with expertise anywhere in any profession or even in our neighborhood or even through just the human condition where we all die at some point. But when we lose something, it doesn't come back. And with that, we also lose something that I think is undervalued: institutional memory of
mm,
what that enriching education, what good teaching can and ought to be. But once it's gone, folks, it
yeah.
doesn't come back easily. So, heed the warning. Let's hold on to these things and figure out how we can adapt and change and adjust, but sustain as well.
Nice. And now it's time for your moment of Zen. Historically, the most terrible things, war, genocide, and slavery, have resulted not from disobedience, but from obedience.
Thanks for listening to this week's Busted Pencils broadcast. And remember to grab great podcasts chocked full of more fully leaded education talk on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and of course on the Civic Media website. Hey, don't be late for homeroom on Monday, and make sure you catch next week's class in session on Wednesday. You can find us on Fridays for producer Jacob's Choice. And just like today, Pencil Busters, you can catch the Busted Pencils broadcast at 3 p.m. Central Time across all the Civic Media Network stations for 1 hour of your favorite blue collar scholars, Hubby Dubby, Slecker, and Johnny, and keep busted pencils.